Hi everybody, my name is Julia Day and I'm from the School of Law, and I'm joined today with Dr. Mary McMillan from the School of Science and Technology, and today we're going to talk about becoming or being a 21st century researcher, and specifically using social media to promote our research.
What does being a 21st century researcher mean? Well, whether we kind of like it or not, these days our lives and our research, our careers is pretty much online. And that's what I wanted to talk about is having an online profile and having an online presence, and particularly some of the opportunities that come from that. Obviously, there are so many different ways that you can have an online presence. We could be sharing research on Twitter, we could be all YouTube or TikTok stars if we wanted to. We're not suggesting that you necessarily want to do all of those things, but we are suggesting that in this day and age, it is important to have some kind of social media or online presence. Probably the first thing anyone is doing if they are looking at you for a job or you're thinking about employing you is they're looking at you online and seeing what's out there about you.
Absolutely.
So that can be kind of scary, right?
I think it can be incredibly scary, but I mean, from my humble lawyer's point of view, obviously I thought about all of the things that could go wrong by venturing on social media. Read too many cases on defamation and social media, for example. Thought about privacy issues, confidentiality. Do I really want to show my own personal life to a wider audience, really, you know? Also, is this something is this narcissistic? Do I really want to come out and just talk about me, you know, the spotlight, which, to be frank, doesn't come very naturally to me. I'd much rather be in the background. But I think there's no doubt about, even though there are risks and there are more opportunities to be gained, in my opinion, from utilising social media in a smart and effective way, especially in terms of your research.
Absolutely. I guess one of those opportunities that springs to mind for me, and something that I've experienced personally, is the idea that having an online presence and social media profiles really lets us engage with a much wider audience than what we normally would. So as a scientist, the people that are reading my research papers, we like to think it's a lot of people, but really in reality it's a small number of people.
Sorry Mary, very few.
But having an online presence and sharing my work and my thoughts and, you know, a bit of my career journey and other sort of aspects alongside my research has really allowed me to engage with all sorts of people, all sorts of audiences, and share that more broadly. So that's something that you wouldn't be able to do necessarily.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. In my opinion, it kind of democratizes as well. Academia, you're able to engage with people that you wouldn't ordinarily. You might inspire, for example, a young science student, like somebody in high school. You know, they might read something or hear something or see a YouTube clip where you're talking about your research, and it might inspire them to think, well, hang on a minute, I can do that as well. That's fascinating, and I can do that. And what a wonderful thing to be able to do for somebody, to be able to pique their interest.
And we all have really interesting research stories. There's a reason we're doing the research that we are. It has some benefit to people, and it's a little sad to think that often the only place that gets shared is in academic journals where there's a very limited audience. So being able to maybe write a blog post about that research or share your personal thoughts about your research and your findings on a social media account, that's a much better way to actually build a lot more awareness for the research that you're doing and just share it a lot more broadly.
Absolutely. So, you know, as I've mentioned, it's sort of democratizing it, but it's also important from a career point of view as well, because we know with the ERA and other government barometers that we've got on us in our research that we need to be engaging with a wider audience. And when I say engaging, that's not just, you know, me saying to you, this is what I think, full stop. You've actually got to engage with the audience and have a discussion about the sorts of research you're doing and what you're doing. And I think one of the things I wanted to pick up on what Mary was saying was passion. How wonderful is it? And you can do this, but it's very difficult to share your passion as to why you're doing something in a peer-reviewed journal article, let's say, for example.
They're quite dry.
Quite dry. But you can still do that really important research, which will go into the peer-reviewed journal, but you can show to a wider audience why you are passionate about that area. You know, why
it matters to them.
Yeah, and why it matters to them and why it matters to the wider world. And I think that's really where you can get that engagement and that interest from a wider group of people.
Which is fantastic when you are applying for grants or jobs. These kind of things really do help as well. So yeah, engaging with a broad audience, huge opportunity there. What about things like collaboration and networking?
Certainly. I mean, you know, it's much easier if you get your name out there. People will be able to see you on social media platforms, or if you've got a blog, for example, it's going to be easier to get a collaboration because more people from a wider diversity of areas are going to be able to know who you are, even without not physically meeting you. And I think, Mary, you've had some recent experiences where you've been successful in this area.
Let's face it, we work at a regional university, we're living in a regional area. Don't know about you, but I find it really difficult to get to conferences, just funding wise, traveling overseas.
Absolutely. And we've both got young families.
It's hard to balance that with families as well.
Yep.
So it can be hard, and you can feel a little isolated, and it can feel like you're lacking those opportunities to network. So a few years ago, I decided to jump on social media and start to put myself out there more. And I found that there's a whole tribe of people out there with similar interests, and not just in terms of my research, but in communication of science and other areas. And I've also formed collaborations with people I wouldn't necessarily have thought I would before. I'm very much a lab scientist tied to the lab bench, you know, playing with people's DNA and things, working in better understanding the biology of mental health disorders. So now online I've connected with a bunch of people who are interested in other aspects of mental health. And like even later this week, I'll be on a webinar with some of these researchers and collaboration with scholarly publishers and societies talking about mental health in academia. And they just found me because of my online presence and profile and the way that I share my research and my interests and get involved in different discussions. So never would have met them otherwise. So that's been a real benefit.
It's fantastic. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to be able to do, to meet. And especially, you know, for those of us who potentially, as we were talking about, don't have the funding, or we've got young families or other responsibilities, it's a great way of being able to have all of those networking benefits and the collaboration benefits without having to spend, you know, tens of thousands of dollars traveling overseas each year, for example. So it is a wonderful opportunity and wonderful way of doing it.
And if you do get to go to a conference, if you've connected with people online beforehand, it makes that experience so much more valuable, because you've already built some initial connection. That's and then you can turn up in person and really pick up where you've left off without having to do all of the
legwork.
All of the legwork before. Yeah. So that's a good way to connect to people. If you're visiting another country or another area of Australia, you know, you can hook up with lab visits and all sorts of things with people that you've met online, and which is great.
Of course, you know, researching can be a very lonely activity. I don't know about others, but certainly the sort of research I do, it's not generally anyway, it's me sitting by myself, you know, reading, engaging with the material on my own. So, you know, I'm naturally, as I'm sure many of us are, and naturally a fairly social people are social human beings. So it's another really good way of mitigating that research loneliness, because you're actually able to go and it excites you. I think you're able to go and get excited about what you're doing again if you're engaging with a wider audience. Absolutely.
A sense of community. I think that is something that has been important for me in this early part of my career, being an early career researcher, and starting work at UNE without having a huge support network there, and not having so many other early career researchers around. So I found that online instead. I found that community online and realised that, people are going through the same sorts of issues and having the same kind of doubts. There's a lot of early career researcher chat, PhD student chat, where people are really sharing those experiences and building support networks. And that is an amazing thing that can come out of having online presence. We always hear stories about some of the bad things.
Naturally, the lawyer brain goes to those. Sorry, Mary.
but you know, that sense of community is really important.
Absolutely.
So you can use it in a professional sense in more than one way. So sharing your research is one way, but also just having some of those personal and community connections is another opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for us also to talk about the different platforms that you can use on social media. To think that you can go in and become a social media star on every platform is probably a little bit fanciful. Not to mention, unless you want to do nothing else with your life for the rest of your life, you're not going to be able to achieve it. So you can come up with it. You can say, throw your hands in the air. It's all too much. I'm never going to be able to achieve that. Or you can have a think about it and think, well, okay, what are the sort of platforms I'm interested in? What, where do I want, what audience do I want? Who do I really want to engage with? And then you can have a look at the platforms, because they're all slightly different, and work out, okay, what do I want to, what should I focus on, and focus on those.
Yeah, for example, I'm really interested in sharing sort of glimpses into academic life and communicating more generally about science. So a lot of my networks on social media are not other researchers, even though I do engage with people doing similar research as well. It's about choosing platforms. For example, I do use Facebook, but I use that for a personal communication and family stuff, whereas my Twitter and Instagram accounts are public. And so there's a bit of personal life in there, but it's mostly public facing stuff. It's about, here's a snippet of life in academia today. Here's me working in the lab and what I'm working on, and sharing some of that process. Here's my latest publication, go read it because it's awesome. Those are the kinds of platforms that I've chosen. Whereas I know, Julia, yours is quite different, what you've chosen.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've sort of gone into it in a different way. I went into, the reason I'm interested in social media is I went into it because I, really wanted to promote my school and create a community within the law school. That was what was important to me. I could see there was a real need, especially for online students, to be able to have that sense of community that they didn't have going to into a classroom environment. So I've really sort of focused on building up the law school social media platforms, which I'm very pleased that I've done, because that has really helped not only me, but a lot of the academics and also students. It really has been successful in terms of building up a strong online community. So now I'm going more into the phase of actually focusing more on myself and my own research, which, I'll be honest, doesn't particularly come naturally. I'm the sort of person who I'm probably more happier being in the background and celebrating somebody else.
Yeah.
But I've realised that to be successful, and I've looked at what other people are doing, other academics, and particularly Mary, for example, and realised that that's really what you need to be doing as an academic these days. You need to be building up your brand, not in an icky yucky way, but you need to be communicating with people in this sort of way,
showing people who you are and what you're interested in, what you're about. There is an uncomfortable aspect of self-promotion.
Absolutely.
But there's a big difference between jumping online and saying, oh gosh, aren't I wonderful, here's all the great things, and just sharing some of your personal thoughts. There's quite a difference between those things. So it doesn't have to be done in a way that's extremely icky.
Yeah, so again, it's also a gendered issue. Often women don't want to put themselves out there, and you can understand. I'm certainly like that, but there are just too many benefits not to do it. In terms of the platforms that I've sort of used before and I enjoy using, I think LinkedIn is a very good platform, especially for professional interactions. It really helps you build up your professional profile, helps you, network with other people in your area and other people outside of your area as well. So LinkedIn is a really good way, I think, to go if you're going to do just one thing professionally. I like Facebook as well, because I'm a bit of a jokester, I suppose. I like, I like joking around with people. I like writing silly little, stories, etc. Never felt like a typical academic. Always felt like not quite right. But I like Facebook, and of course, majority of people are on Facebook, so it's a very good way of going.
And you're blogging now, aren't you?
And I've just started my own blog, which is called Academically Blonde, and that's a bit of a take on, I've never really, as I said to you before, never really felt like I fitted in to the academic community, and it's of course, legally blonde, etc. So it's a bit of a take on that, and I'm very excited about building that up, and as Mary was saying, telling my story, but in a distinctive and personal way. So yeah.
So I guess we should give everyone a few tips, maybe
Sounds
on
fantastic.
how to get started with an online profile or having this online kind of presence. So first of all, make an account, right?
Yeah, good way of starting.
Choose a platform, think about what you want to share, what you want your brand to be, and think about what platform might suit that. For some people, if you don't have a lot of time to invest, things like Twitter aren't maybe the best. It's very, very fast moving. You've got to be on there. You've got to be quite active. LinkedIn is a little bit more slow paced.
Yep.
It's longer form. It's a little bit
right.
slower. You know, once or twice a week is plenty to kind of
That's
get in
right.
there and engage.
That's exactly right. So again, I would say don't go and do everything. Start an account on every platform. I don't think you physically would be able to do that, and you'll drive yourself insane. But you know, as Mary was saying, I'm personally not a fan of Twitter, and that's not because I don't think there's anything wrong with Twitter, but I like the longer formed material. That's why I like writing stories about people and about issues and about things. So I find sort of Twitter's great as a funnel. You can, you know, have a little link to go, you know, to something else that's longer form. But, you know, as I said, my preference would certainly be more LinkedIn, Facebook, and also, you know, having your own blog. But of course, it's all very, very time consuming.
It is time consuming. That is something to keep in mind, but it does take up time to really build a good social profile, because it's not about just creating an account and putting it out there. People aren't going to come knocking on your door just because you've created a profile. You need to be engaging with people. That's really key to making the most out of social media, is interaction, getting involved in discussions, commenting on things other people have shared, not just putting something out there, but putting something out there that's meaningful and having some value to it. So don't just chuck up a link and go, here's a link. Maybe say why you found that link interesting, or you know, here's an article I've read and here's why I find it interesting, or whatever else. So it's that engagement and that discussion.
That's right. You're contributing to a discussion, aren't you? A conversation. You're not just there because it's fanciful to think that you can, as Mary was saying, that you can just put something out there and say, here it is, isn't it great, baby?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be interested in that. But if you've got some sort of value that you can add, or you're contributing to the conversation, that's when it becomes important and valuable.
Like a wise person once said to me, which was not you, that
I'm horrified, Mary.
that visibility and being visible without value is just vanity. So if you're just doing it to put yourself out there, that's vanity. But putting a story out there and showing how your work contributes to wider society, that's got value to it.
That's right. And as Mary was saying, it's telling that story. It's telling a story in a way that others are going to be able to first relate to and understand. There's no point, in my opinion, just putting an A-star journal article online, posting a link and leaving it at that. You're going to ostracize most of your audience for a start. They're not going to have any idea what you're talking about. And which is fine, you know, having an A-star journal article, fabulous. But you can also explain why this is important to a wider audience. Why did you as an individual decide that you would invest so much of your time doing this? And there's normally a reason. Let's face it, with most of the stuff that we as researchers do, there's normally a reason why we do it.
Hopefully.
Would you agree, Mary?
I think we're wasting our time if there's not a good reason for the research we're doing. So that brings us to a good starting point too. If you're not sure what to share and what to put out there, if one of the reasons you haven't become active yet online or on social media is that you're not sure what to share, then if you've just published an article, that's a fantastic thing to share. Share that with people. Maybe consider writing a general, more layperson version of that, or at least some of the main conclusions from that to share.
Yeah.
If you've read something really interesting in your field lately, share that and tell people why you thought it was interesting, and you might engage in discussion with other people who have similar interests. So
absolutely. And one of the
the way you get started.
Absolutely. One of the key things, just you reminded me there, Mary, was that what you're doing, because normally with a research paper you go through all of your analysis, etc., and then you get to the juicy bit at the end. With social media, you want to get to the crux of it at the beginning.
The juicy bit goes first.
The juicy bit is at the beginning, which is very different, of course, from what we normally do as an academic. But an incredibly important, you know, thing to remember, that, you know, that's what you're doing. That's how you're going to get the audience, because unfortunately, very few people are going to read your 10,000 word or whatever journal article. That's a very, very small audience, but there'll be thousands of people, no doubt, who will be very interested in your research and your main conclusion or conclusions.
Exactly.
And how it's going to make a difference to their lives.
So I guess that's pretty much it. Any last word, Julia, before we sign off?
Look, I just want to encourage you all to, even though there are risks and, you know, it can be a little bit confronting, it is well worth making the effort to engage and to use your research, to put it out by using social media and other platforms.
And I'm pretty sure I speak for both of us when I say that you know, if this is something you're interested in and you want to play a little bit more, come and have a chat to one of us. I'm sure we can help you set something up.
Set something up in some way. So I think that was about done us, do you think, Mary?
I think it is. So hopefully we'll see you all online.
Cheers.
Bye.
Good luck, guys. Bye.